when the Dodge asked me to do this, he asked if I would do a little bit more than just a layout tour. So I have a couple of things for you. The first part is 10 or 15 minutes and some ideas that just might make the layout a little bit more comfortable. The second thing, I will show you some things that I do to try to make my layout seem prototypical, even though the railroad only exists in my mind and no train room. And then finally, we'll go on a tour of the railroad. I will warn you on the tour, the first time we had a tour, it was Todd and Molly Herman. They're both television and film professionals, and they know what they're doing. I'm not, and I don't. So I tried to do some video, but it just isn't worth the effort. So everything will be PowerPoint, but I think you'll get around the layout just fine. So let's start with making the layout a little bit more comfortable. We always know the real answer is more space. We're all railroad barons. We want all the ground we can find. We hate to give up any of it for mundane things like room for people to stand. But I'm going to suggest you need to think about it as hard as you can. I have a pretty generous space. I'm very lucky, and I still have some places where I just was unwilling to give up a couple of inches, and I've been paying for it now for the 15 years I've been building the layout. You may think about wide aisles as something for operators, but I'd also suggest to you, if you plan on showing the layout off to your friends, or just having family over, or on those wonderful days when you see repairmen coming down through the train room with things like furnace parts, hot water heaters, ladders, other things that are non-model railroad friendly, you might be happy your aisles are a little wider. My suggestion is 36 inches is about the minimum. Look at me in those pictures. If I stand up straight, put my hands down at my side and stuck in my tummy, I'm about 12 inches wide. Of course, in that position, I'm not doing anything on the train. With the trains, you're not really even enjoying looking at the layout. And I can't pass anybody who's any wider than I am, if all you have is a 24-inch aisle. So I'd suggest 36 inches is about the minimum. There are some things you can do if you just don't have any more space, you just can't make it happen. One of my suggestions is if you have peninsulas or fingers on your layout, locate the switching and the train work and that sort of thing down at the end, so that people like Rod Vance here can work down at that end. You also can see that tank car train, that's on the main line, and it will curve around behind Rod and come out behind the sawmill. And the guy running that train doesn't need to interfere with Ron, and Ron is not bothered by that person running this train. So that's one thought. Another one you may not have thought about is a lot of people like to put information on the fascia. I won't argue whether that's good or bad, but the narrower your aisles are, the harder it is to see that, because you just can't bend down and get a view. So clipboards might be a good answer. Then there's another painful answer, and that is don't invite so many people in the basement. And I'm not trying to be mean there, but a small, tight aisle, crowded room gets old quick. It's not fun to visit. It's not fun to operate in it. That's just how the world goes round. If you're having folks from open house, that's great. I think we've all learned when you do that, if your open house starts at 1, by 1:15, about 95% of the visitors are there, and by about 1:20, they're all there. I've seen a lot of folks who also like to invite family and friends and neighbors, and I think that's great. But what you might want to do is ask them to come a little bit later, so you're dealing with 2 smaller groups instead of one group trying to crowd themselves in the space that you might think is crowded already. Okay, there we go. Okay. There we go. Okay, there's some other things you can do to gain just a few inches, and I will tell you a few inches can be a big gain. So the first thing I've already kind of mentioned it is limited fascia sign. If you got to say anything and you got to put it on the fascia, make it big and easy to read so people don't have to bend down to see it. The second thing is, you see all those green round circles on my layout. All of my electric switches for my tortoise machines are inside inside the plug there, which is the end of PVC pipe. It saves a couple of inches. It also means some of this is kind of built in a way that causes us to turn turnouts even when it doesn't need to happen. So that's a good thing. You might not think about the height of the layout having much to do with the size of the aisles, but I think it does. If the layout is taller, 48, 50 inches, somewhere in there, I can reach out and do whatever it is I need to do on the layout. For the layout of table height, 30 inches, I got to bend over. If I bend down, I also stick out. All of a sudden, the narrow aisle is tougher yet. Another thing you can do is put in curved facial wherever you can. First of all, I think it makes the railroad just look a lot better. Straight lines are visually a little jarring, but also you now have a place you can hang things up, or maybe a place people can step into. Even just insetting the layout lanes a couple of inches can be helpful. Think about a very tight aisle. I'm standing there and somebody else is trying to pass by me. If I'm facing the aisle, I need someplace for my toes. If the lanes are inset a little bit, I won't happen to kick your layout while I'm trying to get out of somebody else's way. So those are all little ideas, some of which you could implement even if your layout is finished right now. Last thing I suggest is, see the big red ink there, major surgery? The little space I have right here between this wall and that float sign used to be 23 inches. It's just not tolerable. It bothered me, and I knew the only way to make any space was to actually leave some track. And one day I just came and did it. I cut off, starting right there. I just cut a line right there. It dropped about 5 inches off the layout. It cost me one track in the yard up there where that so-called tank car is. At the time, it just seemed like an open wound. Nobody else ever commented on it. I think they liked the extra space. That one lost track really wasn't a loss at all. So there's some ideas. Okay, slightly change the subject. Something else to make your layout comfortable and easy for others to use. Consistent turnout control and put the control in the same place all the time. There are a lot of different ways to do it, and I don't have any qualms about that or any special drum to beat. But I can tell you it's very difficult if you're standing someplace, even if you're halfway familiar with the layout, and one of the layouts is manual, one of them has a pull rod, one of them is electrical, and you have to look around and try to find which switch is controlled by which turnout, or which knob. Most of these I think make sense. That's Pete LaGuardia. You can see how his works. You just turn the knob, and you can follow the track plan. That's Andrew Guide, O'Gage. I forget, I think there's a button down here. You actually throw that electrically. Forget whose layout this is, but Caboose ground throws are great. Frankly, I think well done. They look just fine. And the other thing is to use them to kind of reach into the layout, meaning you're sitting a little closer to the patient, meaning the aisle is just a tad bit less narrow. And I've been on opposite layouts, especially when you go into construction where you actually throw turnout simply by pushing it back and forth. The last one here, this happens to be Brian Kidd's layout as he was building it. He has digit tracks and he built it so you could control the turnouts off the throttle. And when you looked at the switch, you always had the number. Yeah, and it was always right there by the throw rod on the throttle. So the point is not how to do it. My point is to be very consistent. Control panels. I'm not a fan of them. We used to have them because you needed to not only throw switches electrically, but you also needed to throw power, and sometimes somebody just ran the panel, all other people ran the train. I understand all of that, but now we live in a world of DCC. The panels aren't quite the gift they used to be. Let me explain. Look at the one that says courthouse on it, the one on the left. It's very neat and tidy, very well done, but think about using it. First, I stand in front of the panel. Now I have to look out and look at the track and find the turnout I want to throw. Then I have to look at the diagram and translate what I saw in the layout to the diagram. Then I have to associate the turnout in the diagram with a number. Then I have to throw the button. And then, of course, I'm going to look back in the layout and see whether or not it threw the turnout I wanted. It gets complex after a while. The other thing is this gets even harder when the panels are bigger, particularly when there's curved lines. The panel on the right is a lot easier to use. This happens to be on Ted Thompson, Chesapeake in Ohio. So if you got to go, this is not so bad. The reason I like it is, number one, there aren't many switches on it, so you can't go too wrong. Number two, he's labeled all the tracks, so it's pretty easy for me to kind of know what I'm looking for even before I look at the panel. And I really like the positive throw of those panels. You know, the way the flange is pointed is the way the turnout is pointed. There's no, is the electricity on or off, what kind of light means what. So, a thought. Creature comforts. The curved corner, that happens to be in my layout. Masonite, or whatever you use for your fascia, normally has a little bit of give to it. If you curve the corners, first of all, again, I think it makes layouts look better. You can kind of follow the curve of the track, as you see I've done right here. But the other thing, it means nobody's bumping into a 90-degree corner. That gets old too, especially in crowded locations. Stools, awful nice for some of us as you get a little bit older. If you got room, you're willing, that's not a bad thing. Last thing you might think about is stuffed shelves. Here, I just have a shelf hanging down from the fascia in front of the main yard, and it's very handy just because you have to put the throttle down. You need a pencil or a pen. Now everybody's took the telephone. Who knows? Somebody might even want a soda. So I try to make an effort if I don't have it right in front of them. I try to make sure there's some place for people to put stuff down wherever I think they're going to have to stop and work. The last suggestion, picks. Lots and lots of picks. Most of us uncouple cars on our railroads using barbecue skewers that we turn into picks. And I am absolutely amazed how many times I go to a layout and I'm looking at thousands of dollars worth of trains and I can't find a pick. And it's even worse on a layout that isn't finished. The pick is natural wood, the layout is natural wood, and there's only one. You have to share it. I just did a little research this morning. You can buy 400 picks at Amazon for $8.95. And shipping's free if you got time. Anyhow, if you really need to know it, for $3.95 you can buy 100. Okay, that's everything I got in that little story. Ernie, I'm going to stop my screen for a minute and then I will turn to the next presentation. Okay. My Oregon Coast Railroad, as I mentioned a little while ago, only exists in my basement and in my mind. But when you look at it, whether you come down and take a look, or you're just looking at a picture, or you're seeing a video, I like you to think it looks like a real railroad. The first thing I've done to create that, I think, is just by the name. When I say it's Oregon, you probably think of green trees. And I do have a lot of green trees in the layout. So I kind of got you buying into my story already. And I always think of this a little bit like you're watching a Gladiator movie and all of a sudden you notice one of the extras is wearing a wristwatch. You'll never remember the story of that movie, but you'll always remember that wristwatch. And so I spend a lot of effort trying not to have a wristwatch in my layout. The first thing is I set the layout on a map and I set an era. In my case, it's Northwest Oregon and the year is 1957. As soon as I've said that, you know a whole lot of things. When I decided it's Oregon, I use real place names, even though I don't actually, I model places, I call Tillamook or Portland, but they don't resemble the real Tillamook or Portland. But a lot of people know where that is. Again, they're buying into the story. Oh yeah, I've been to Portland, but my brother-in-law lives in Portland, or whatever. The whole layout becomes real. And when I tell you where my layout is, I think you probably already have an idea what kind of traffic will I have, what's going on in that railroad, an idea of what kind of engine cars you might see. And I'm going to show you the layout pretty soon, and I hope I haven't made myself a liar. You also, I suspect, have a great idea of what you think you should see in scenery. You're going to see a lot of green, probably going to see a lot of hills. It also tells you a lot about industry. This part of Oregon, especially in the mid-50s when I was growing up there, we didn't have smokestack industry. We had lumber, timber, lumber products, a lot of agriculture, and then industries that served the local population. And also, just by nature of what all of those things are, the location and the era set the kind of structures and vehicles I use. Okay, so when I thought about that, some of you may have heard the term elevator speech. What happens if you get on the elevator at work and the boss walks in and says, "What are you doing?" Well, I have an elevator speech to my railroad. This is it. Oregon Coast is a branch line railroad hauling forest products and general freight in 1957. That's a great definer of the world in my basement for me. It tells me what to buy, it tells me what to build, and I think once you look at it, it gives you a real good idea of what you would expect to see. Even though my railroad is totally fictional, I'd like to say it's based on the Astoria line of Spokane, Portland, and Seattle, but every day that goes by and every time I do something, it becomes more and more fictional and less based, or more loosely based on the SP&S. Even still, references are really handy. Railroads ran there, the business they did, the scenery they ran through, the kind of decisions they made for cars, bridges, engines, all of those sort of things were driven by the location they're in. So taking a look at what they did gives you a good idea for what you ought to do if you want to make your fictional layout realistic. You might also notice down at the bottom, I have a little paperback book on American trucks. Automobiles not too tough. The trucks, I don't have a real good sense of what trucks ran when. So this little picture book helps me. The streetcar themes book might surprise you, but really it's a tremendous aid. The reason is when people take pictures of streetcars, there's a lot of surrounding area in it. So you see things like in this book, there's a picture on a street in Altoona, and there are about a dozen buildings there. Every one of them is brick, every one of them is red brick, and none of them are the same color. It's just absolutely amazing. The other thing this book does is it's a lot of good information with pictures of signs, billboards. Very interesting to see what cars look like. Very interesting to see how people dress. Matter of fact, in this book, I learned up until about 55 or so, cars and men's suits were about the same color, gray, black, brown. It's only in the mid-50s all of a sudden you started seeing two-tone in cars. Okay, and speaking of these references, this one was a real find. One of the Morning Sun books, and this one was about diesel engines for the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad. And if the engine was good enough for them, it's good enough for me. Well, I guess the SP&S board of directors were all model railroads. The SP&S never had more than 100 diesels, and they had everything, absolutely everything. You see 6 different types here, and that doesn't include that had an E7, they had F units, they had also PAs and PBs. So I just happened to stumble into a lucky find there. And the other thing I did with engines is, my suspicion is when the second plastic diesel was released in the hobby market, somebody hauled it home, scrubbed the name off, and renamed it for their railroad. And that's exactly what I did. I knew kind of engines I wanted, I knew the purposes. So I just started looking at what was available, particularly what was available that was painted black. Brought them home, took the lettering off, added my decals. In some cases, I added some stripes. I also added bells to all of them. So it's like a family. It looks like it belongs to a single railroad. At least I think it does. And that's what you'd expect to see on any railroad. Another thing I've done in my case is, my story is, the Oregon Coast Railroad is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad. And it's factual that the FT&S was owned jointly by the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern. You notice NP and FT&S both put logos in script font and the producers. So I did the same thing. I joined the family. Another thing I try to be careful about, it's hard to always be disciplined, and this is just a hobby, so I will admit sometimes I know what my own rules are, but that doesn't mean I follow them. But I look at cars and try to make sure they fit. I don't want a wristwatch running around the layout. So the yes column, well, life is pretty simple. The box car is the right paint scheme, it belongs like it was built before. 1957 tank cars, probably the biggest you see, are 11 and 12,000 gallon tank cars with a frame. In my area, skeleton log cars were the way these things were done. The middle column, you know, the box car doesn't fit because the paint scheme is too new. The pulp car might surprise some of you a little bit. A pulp car like that's very stubborn. I never saw a pulp car like that in any Western road. So they dealt with pulp at all. They stuck it upside, standing upright in battered old gondolas. The last one, the covered hopper. Covered hoppers were around in my time frame, but they didn't start turning green until the 60s. That means on my railroad, covered hoppers, about all they might carry would be cement or lime, something along those lines. And just because of location on that, that wouldn't be big business. So those cars just don't happen to fit. The whom column. This is where it gets hard to be true to your own rules sometimes. Or maybe you just have to use a little bit of common sense of, it's not that it couldn't be, it just might not look right. So the top is a chip hopper, chips on hole actually. Hard to carry wood chips. Wood chips first became a commercial product, a raw material for other wood products, about 1957. Railroads did not like to haul them because they're so light. Matter of fact, normally railroads would say, we will do that if you also give us a business of whatever product you make out of them. So the railroad started equipping old gondolas and hoppers with extensions to haul chips. And as it happened, there were a lot of gondolas and hoppers around because by 1957, an awful lot of steam engines had disappeared, and there wasn't nearly the demand for coal across the nation as there had been. So it's easy to know when the gondola or the hopper was made. It's not so easy to know when did the extensions get added and when did it become a chip car. I like these cars. I just got 2 more in the mail this morning. And I don't want to know anymore. They're good enough, close enough, they're right enough. The piggyback cars. Southern Pacific extended piggyback service into Oregon in 1955, and part of my layout is located in the industrial area of Portland. So I suppose it's feasible, but piggyback didn't get going real big in my time period, at least not in that location. I say that now there were easily available models of era correct piggyback cars. I just might have a few. The last car, the state of Maine, this is just an interesting thing about railroads. The Bangor and Roostock had all of these box cars for hauling potatoes, but they didn't need them about 10 months of the year. So they leased them out to anybody who would pay the lease. For all I know, maybe some of them were leased to Oregon, but it just doesn't look very logical to me that you had a boxcar from Maine running around in Oregon, particularly when most people, at least when I was growing up, associated Maine with potatoes. And to get a Maine boxcar to Oregon, you would have to go through Idaho, which was the other big potato state. So I wouldn't say the state of Maine car didn't make it to Oregon. I would say people are going to spot it and it looks like a wristwatch. Okay. Another thing that helped the layout look prototypical is the distribution of cars. That is, where did all of them come from? We couldn't look at this picture of the yard and say, yeah, that's Portland, Oregon. But I think you could look at it and say, that's probably not Atlanta. It's probably not Newark. Probably not even Chicago. It's somewhere in the West. And you notice on the map, I put a little star where I'm at. You can't send cars, railroad cars, any further west than my layout models unless you want to just dump them in the ocean. That means my layout doesn't see much bridge traffic. So I don't have too many Eastern Road cars. I have a couple of Pinkies because Pinky is everywhere, and a couple of New York Central. But I don't have Southern or Illinois Central or some of those railroads. It's just hard for me to go through a process and imagine why would they be there. Car types are also part of the story we're trying to tell. You can look at this picture and right in the middle you see the chip cars, and you'll see when I show you the layout, there's a lot of chip production on the layout. I probably have more refrigerated cars than you might think I should have for my totals, but the reason is about 30 of these cars are Swift leases, and there's a big Swift plant on the layout. I also have a lot of tank cars, maybe more than is real logical, except that I also have an oil facility where tank ships would come in, bring oil, and then that oil would be distributed in tank cars. And I also have a fairly big number of stock cars considering my location, but it's because stock is bought through Swift. What you might also notice here is I don't have many hoppers, very few hoppers. And I'm not even quite sure what I've got in those hoppers. I don't know why I've got them. But coal was not common in Oregon. There was never any commercial coal mining in the state. A little bit back in the gold rush days, but never commercial coal mining. And railroads like the SP&S never had coal-fired steam engines. They were oil-fired. So coal was not used as a heating fuel. Back before chips became a byproduct, they were used to heat homes. So unlike the East Coast and railroads that are just almost exclusively hoppers, I have barely any. Structure kits. I love structures. There's some really great kits out there. There are lots of them. Most of them are quality products. You may have to search for a particular one, but you can go on eBay or up to Mainline Hobby, any good hobby store, and find plenty of choices. And except for glue and paint, most of them have everything you need. And the more you build them, the more you learn about building. Eventually, as you go through, you can evolve into both kit bashing and scratch building. So I like kits. All of these buildings on my layout are kits. But there's a bad side to them. The first thing that's a little bit of a problem is the common. It really doesn't make too much difference if I have a small town and my station looks a little bit like the station in your small town, and lo and behold, we have a friend and our stations look somewhat like his. But look at the pool hall there. It's a nice building, nice kit by JL Innovative. But if every one of us have it, starts to look a little, another thing that can be wrong with kits is they're often not railworthy. let the DOT out a boxcar in a little white building. It's a nice building from A and B, and they didn't specifically design it to be rail served. But you see this sort of thing on layouts, and when the square footage of the building and the car are the same, that's probably not railworthy. Another thing that I'm very conscious of is I grew up in Oregon. When I came to the East Coast, I was amazed to see asphalt shingles on houses and things like that. House siding, it just isn't done in Oregon. Also, even just a brick house in the 50s would have been uncommon in Oregon. Last thing I'd say about structure kits is they make bad choices easy. Because there's some really good kits, they've got everything on them, they're in them. An example right there is the coal tower on my layout. As I said, the SPNS never had steam engines that were fed by coal. And when I had steam engines on my layout, I just didn't want to stop and put oil tenders on everything. And Walters came out with that great set of the roundhouse and the full tower. And so I bought it, and I built it, and put it on the layout. And I think most of the people came and looked were, yeah, that's fine, another good scene. But every now and then I get somebody pretty knowledgeable who'd say, Paul, to me it's sort of like they said, wristwatch, huh? Okay, one of the things you can do with a kit is think very carefully about what you're going to do with it. Paint it differently, use different signs. The water tank there is an old fine scale miniature kit. On my layout, it's now 1957, and we don't have any steam engines, so we removed the tower. And it's also 1957, so this bar mill passenger station, it's now been closed up and it's starting to fall apart already. Okay. One other thing about looking like a believable railroad is to make the industries on it appropriate for the location that you're at. And also, they can be rail served, make them big enough that it looks like railroad ought to be there. Portland is 100 miles inland, but it's along the Columbia River. And Portland is actually an ocean port. And I also had Astoria on my layout, which is right on the Pacific Ocean and an ocean port. So this ship is just a great answer. And of course, it's Oregon. You can expect lumber mills. You're also going to expect a paper mill. And Potomac cheese is the local product. I'll talk more about it later, but these are railworthy, rail-served industries appropriate for the location. Vehicles and signs. It's a good way to stab yourself. The model railroad cover, I believe that magazine, I can't quite see it. I think that magazine was in the early 70s or late 60s. And it's kind of sad in a way. The tower there was a beautiful model made from paper. The layout owner was a very skilled modeler. But the magazine used to take letters in those days. And several people wrote to complain about the freeway entrance sign. They thought it just didn't look right. It wasn't in the right location. And sadly, I suspect anybody who remembers this cover remembers the freeway sign, not the strap-built three-story tower. Another thing that I remember when I bought my first fine scale miniature kit, they had a lot of signs in it, and I kind of liked the sign for Moxie. I thought that was pretty neat. And it wasn't until several years later, I guess really until I had good access to the internet, I found out Moxie was soda made in New England. So people from Boston know what Moxie is. People in Portland, Oregon never heard of Moxie. The automobile, I think that's an Oxford die-cast model. And I'll bet virtually everyone of you know it's 1957 Chevrolet. It's a great model, and my layout is 1957, so it's totally appropriate. But I'd also say if you have this model on your layout, you're not modeling the 50s, you're modeling the late 50s. And if you have this model on your layout and you're modeling the 80s, one, maybe so. half a dozen. That isn't the way the world works. The picture on the bottom is kind of on me. This is some stockyards. The old pickup, it's one of those old Scale Structures Limited, SS Limited Keelers, I think they were called. And that's a truck from the 20s or 30s. Now, I grew up on farms, and I know farm trucks never die. They just keep getting relegated to less and less significant jobs. So an old pickup tumbling hay around the stockyard maybe isn't out of the question. But in 1957, a billboard advertising the radio, I need to fix that. I need to find a better advertisement. You're going to take a trip around the Oregon Coast Railroad now. Again, it's 1957. I started the layout in May of 2005, and in February of 2020, I would have told you it was done. I did have a plot things I would like to do, and pandemic gave me a chance to do it, so you'll see some changes. Layout fills 2 rooms. This is the front room, and this is where most of the layout is, and most of the towns are anyway. Okay, this is the second room. This is all Vancouver, Washington. Just a word before I take you around the layout. I have 2 different kinds of backdrops. You can see the picture on the left. That backdrop, when I bought this house, the basement was unfinished. I hired some people. They came in and put up the wallboard. One night while they were gone, I painted the side of the wallboard about halfway down blue, then used a spray can with a cutout and put clouds in it. Very simple to do, and frankly, I like the effect. Backdrops are supposed to be backdrops. The only bad part about that is spray cans create a lot of dust. So once I got into the house and started building more layout, and the carpet went down, and the railroad went down, and scenery went down, I wasn't doing spray can scenery anymore. So I actually painted the backdrop on the white, and I'm no artist, but I got this book from Potomac, and on one page, about page 26 or something, is almost a paint by the numbers how to do this. And I just started out, and I think it came out just fine. It's no great piece of art, but it's just perfect for a backdrop. Okay. When I first built the Oregon Coast Railroad, there was a typical point-to-point railroad that ran from Portland, the Hoyt Street Yard, along the Columbia River, and came down to Potomac. I built it for operation, and we've had 63 operating sessions on it. Very pleasing. But I decided what I wanted to do is make a switch and make it a switching layout. Switching layout, much like Paul Gokus in Baltimore Harbor District. Also, there's a man in Kansas City, Chuck Hitchcock, who built a basement-sized switching layout, and I had a chance to be on it. And I just really like that idea. So instead of this 160-mile trip from Portland all the way out to the Pacific Ocean and south, I'm now just going to model a railroad that covers a 10-mile stretch from the Hoyt Street Yard to Swift, to a new industrial area of Kenton, to a modified industrial area now called North Portland, to Willbridge, which will be a yard run by the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad, and then across the river to Vancouver, Washington. This is Washington State, incidentally. Vancouver, most of you know, in British Columbia, is another 300 miles north or so. So this is 10 miles. You also see the Columbia River and the Willamette River make kind of a triangle here. This is called the Portland Industrial District, the Clinician Industrial District, and that's where I'm going to model now. So we're going to start on the east end. You'll be able to keep track because there'll be a star and the name highlighted to show you where we're at in these slides. Okay, we start at the very east end of the layout. This is what we're going into. We came into the room from the basement. The engine facility. Pete LaGuardia made that overhead crane for me. The diesel house beside it was a Walters kit. They had 3 days of the kit, and it also was a brick building. And I cut off a day and used plaster to fill in the gaps in the brick to make it look like concrete. Next to the engine facility, these 4 tracks, the 2 empty ones and the 2 with cars on them, are interchange tracks. The idea is the Southern Pacific, Union Pacific, and Northern Pacific brought cars over to the yard transfers, the cars they had for us. And off scene, we also took, the Oregon Coast Railroad took cars to them. So I do this instead of staging. And right there, I have 4 tracks. You can see how many cars are able to go on the track. Here that's the Brooklyn yard owned by the Southern Pacific, Albina to Union Pacific, and then to the Northern Pacific. Yeah. If you get past the interchange yards, both the fuel, Paul did an article on small oil depots that I always liked. So I built this and named it with that in mind, even though this doesn't look anything like what Paul built. This is the Caboose facility. The yard, I have 2 arrival departure tracks in the Hoy Street yard. They'll hold up to 18 cars each, and that's the limit for train length on the railroad. Notice way down in the end, you'll see a freight house. This is a fine scale miniature kit, and I happen to know I made it in August of 1973. I bought it for $8.95. And it really links my love affair with the custom building kit. You notice there's another one out there, the model kit behind it. You'll see several custom kits in the layout and a lot of kit bashing and a lot of stress building. The classification yard at Hoyt Street, the 5 track will hold about 50 cars, and that's fine for the train length and the level of activity we have. Swift meatpacking plant is the biggest industry in the layout. There really was a Swift plant in Portland. Matter of fact, if we went to the NMRA National Convention in Portland in 2016, I think it was, and you rode the light metro out to the exposition hall where the train show was, you were standing on the ground of the old Swift plant. The picture on the right here shows the inspection track. The idea is the refrigerator car arrives here first, and government inspectors take a look and certify it's clean and it can be loaded. And one of the things that makes Swift so interesting to operate is I put a 2-person crew here, and they'll deal with 40 to 60 cars in 3 hours, and many of the cars require mobile moves inside the plant. For instance, the reefers go from the inspection track, which is over in here, over to the icing track. Once they've been iced, they go on this track and go back to the plant where they get loaded. Once they've been loaded, they can either be taken directly back to Hoy Street or put on this interchange track and be when enough cars have been gathered that makes sense. The other thing that I think is kind of fun about the meatpacking plant is the great number of cars. Types of cars, stock cars, reefers, box cars. You can see a propane tank car here, kind of dark, but there's an oil tank car right there. I could have gondolas. Not much waste came out of packing plants, but there was some, like the innards of animals, and sometimes it was just loaded into gondolas and hauled off. I decided not to model that. Co-located with the Swift in the Portland Union Stockyards. In stockyards, Union stockyards are their own industry. Sometimes stock was brought in by rail car, held, sold, and then moved back out by rail car to the new buyer. I think they sometimes, often, as much a bit part of the business of the Union stockyards as Swift was. Now we've come around the corner. We're in Kenton, which is the newest area in the layout. I just built this in the last 12 or 14 months while we've been buttoned down. Kenton is a real neighborhood. industrial slash commercial slash warehousing neighborhood in North Portland. And you're looking down my version of North Lombard Street. This building is a branch house, in this case, a normal branch house. Branch houses receive cut meat from meat packing plants, and they did the final work with it, turned it into steaks or roasts or hamburger or whatever was appropriate. And their customers would have been restaurants and independent grocery stores. And in 1957, an independent grocery store, there was such a thing. Okay, we're now looking at the Columbia River salmon cannery. In the 50s, it was possible to do commercial fishing off the mouth of the Columbia River by Astoria. But even by the time I went to college and was fishing for salmon commercially, it was done in Alaska. But in the mid-50s, that was still feasible. This little fishing boat is a Dutch kit, company called Arctic. I want to see here, or the story here is Lance Menheim in his newest book, Model Railroading with Art, talks about streets do not compress. It just doesn't look right. And I took him at his word. So this street, Lombard Street, has 6 foot wide sidewalk, 9 foot wide parking strip, and 10 foot wide travel lane. So the road is 50 feet wide, and I think it's pretty believable. Might also notice the mobile station here. Paul Docus has finished his layout, had time on his hands, so we built it for me. That's a lucky break. Paul also had time on his hands, and he built Red Wing Shoe Store and the Stick and Span Diner. They're both stripe built. And he built from the picture I found of these 2 buildings side by side in Mason City, Iowa. And another friend, Brian Kidd, made the jazz club here. Fredmeyer Bakery. Well, before I talk about that, I want to show you one right here. This is another Lance Menheim inspiration. Lance talks about what he calls negative space or open space, parking lot, open lot, empty field, pastures, planted field, forest, all those things that exist other than just buildings. And he treated us as a model railroaders of having a tendency to see an open space and plant another building. And I think he's right. So I tried to make a big area here. It looked like the truck drivers could actually turn the trucks around and work in the space. And I like to think it makes it believable. Okay, Fredmeyer Bakery. Fredmeyer is a Northwest chain created in the early 50s, very much like Walmart. It still exists in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And the idea of this particular building is their commercial bakery where they would have made rolls and cookies and other things that had the Fredmeyer brand on them. Now you can see the busiest industrial tract in Kenton. This one serves all the local industries here. This one serves a steam track. And the middle one is a working track. Portland Wholesale Produce is scratch built. The other Pacific Cone Company. It was a real business in Portland, Oregon. I have no idea how it got its name. And the product was ice cream cones. And they made ice cream cones in such quantity that they were moved out by rail. National Cold Storage is a modified Walters kit. The last industry in Kenton is Fred Kluge. This is a cold storage and wholesale fruit and vegetable here. These buildings are scratched. Now we come around the corner again. We're in North Portland. The first industry, the Oregon Coast Railroad supply yards, rail, ties, ballast, that sort of thing. And here we're still going west. We've been going west the whole trip. And you're just looking up through North Portland. This building, Don Eagle Millworks, named for a local friend, Don Eagle. It's a South Southern model kit. you might notice a guy working on the roof. When I built the kit, it had a piece of cardboard that I was supposed to make that roof with, and I just could not make it lay flat. So finally I gave up, got a small piece of wood, put it there, and put the guys on top, adding toilet paper. This building, the Borden building, is a condensatory. A condensatory makes canned milk. That was a big product in the 50s. This small building is also part of the condensatory, and it's also a South River model kit. Bissinger. Bissinger was another real industry in North Portland. Bissinger took the fleece off of sheep hide and then cleaned it so it was available, so it could then be turned into yarn. And woolen products are a big thing in Oregon. Pendleton woolen mills are in Portland, as well as Jensen Sportswear. I'm not sure whether they still exist, but it was a big game of ladies' wear in the 50s and 60s. Okay, now we're coming around the corner. The yellow farmhouse is A and B kit. The white farmhouse is made from an article in Railroad Pressman, I think. We're now looking at really the last semblance of forest on the layout since I've gone over this industrial stone. But I'd say it's pretty typical Oregon. You can even see here an interior lumber mill. The bridge is a Walters Bridge. We're going over Fishhawk Creek. Now we're getting into the area that I'm working on right now. So these areas need a lot more detail to be finished. The two industries in this part are this pole yard and also Victoria windows. Those of you who knew the layout before I made these changes would remember you actually went up a hill. The Victoria windows and the pole yard were up at about this height. It was just very hard to work. It was just too high. And unfortunately, some of the track was very hard to reach. So it either got out of alignment or it wasn't cleaned very well. So everything that can go wrong with track you can't reach went wrong with that track. So I just took it out and lowered it, and now it should be much improved. Okay. Springhaven Shops, that's named after or honor of George Hughes. Many of you might have known him. He was a Digitrax dealer in our area. Back in the day when your Digitrax dealer was probably more important than your cardiologist. We lost George several years ago, but I still remember him. This picture, I've made a big change here, and I have a big open area. It's going to have piers and wharfs in it. It's going to have 3 or 4 ships that I want to build. You might have already caught on. I like the waterfront look. And a question a lot of people ask me is, how do I make my water? Well, most of it I make with this product, Pledge Revive It. It used to be Future. It's the same formula. And I like it. It's acrylic wax. It's made to make your floors really shiny, but nobody does things that way anymore. But it's great for areas you want to make water seam, because the wax is very liquid and it spreads and it tends to level things out quite nicely. And I think you can buy a bottle this size from Amazon for $13. Now we're going into Wheelbridge. Wheelbridge is named, really the railroad, the SP&S named it, because there's a bridge over the Willamette River in Wheelbridge. This ship model is by Sylvan. I always say it's the best ship model on the market, mainly because it first came out. It was the only ship model on the market. A little tough to build, but I think it came out all right. It's 3 feet long, so it's kind of impressive when you walk down the stairs, and that's the first thing you see. And I have been doing some upgrades to it. I got new ladders for it off of Safeway, and then trying to get some new winches for it. Okay. This grain mill, the middle building, was an A and B kit. And the other two were just things I had around for one reason or another. And I got the idea to join them together like this. I'd never seen it before. But there's a concrete grain elevator. We was building to join to it on both sides out in Marshall, Virginia, right on Highway 55. I just like to look. So that's why I did that. Okay, on this side, the float goes to Walker, Washington. Walker, Washington is a small logging and fishing community on a very isolated southwest corner of Washington State. So it's about 90 miles down to Columbia from where this would be. Okay, so now you can see going into Wilbridge. Here's a small yard. It would be run by the Spokane Portland and Seattle Railroad. We need to change the welcome to Astoria sign and the Astoria sign on the station now because this area is now Wilbridge. Most of these buildings are scratch built, some of them are put back. The Western Watch paper, I never knew what a watch paper building actually looked like until I made one, but now I do. When trains get to Oregon, wheat growers, wheat is a big product in Eastern Oregon. You know, both Portland and Astoria, they're big elevators that load ships from moving wheat to the Orient. So that's why this is here. And also trains go behind it and go through a hole in the wall to come out in the second room, which is where Potomac is, excuse me, Potomac cheese. This is now Vancouver. Potomac cheese is a real company, been around for about 150 years. You can buy cheese and also their ice cream probably in your local grocery stores now. I use my own artistic license to create the building. The business is actually the building is fancy. A log mill, just exactly what you expect to see in Oregon. This is a kit from Sierra West. Every board is a single board. It took me about 400 hours to put all of this together. As we come around the corner, that house also was scratch built, including the windows and doors. I made them out of styrene, much easier than I thought it would be. I also made the shingles out of styrene. This is a yard office for Vancouver. It's a scratch built. I saw a building on Bill Barnaby's Maumee route. I was in the magazines a lot. The yard office he put on his layout, he said it wasn't a model of anything in particular, it just looked right. And I was very impressed and I decided to copy that. So I built this, it just got this funky railroad functional architecture look to me. You might have also noticed this one just like it in Astoria. Okay, these tracks lead down to Bell Oil. There was Thompson was named after my buddy John, who's on right now, I think. He's always got a new radio or computer or something, so it looks like for him to have the electronic company here, the marine radio. This is Bell Oil. This anchor ship would come in and fill all the tanks at Bell, and then tank cars would carry that product throughout Oregon and Washington and Inland, Idaho, Utah. There's the lumber pier. And you can see I really do like ships. This ship is a kit from Architect. The same people made the fishing boat. Architect again is a Dutch company. And I think this ship was built to work in canals in Europe. But I think it comes across very well. It's probably the most detailed ship on the layout. And we are now looking at Columbia Dock Company in Pier 4, 3 tracks. From Pier 4, you can look across and see the lumber ship that we saw. There's a lumber pier. Now you can see it from this side. The lumber ship is also a Sylvan ship. Here's kind of view from Pier 4. Right there's the yard office again. And then also here's a very small yard. And these two tracks, this track goes on the main line. There is a main line. This track goes into Christopher Paper. The main line track goes right underneath the Christopher paper plant, and then it'll come out of, it'll go through the wall again. You'll see it in a minute. This track goes up to Christopher paper. And there's kind of a big look at Christopher paper. There's where the track comes in. Christopher paper has a power plant right there, right there. Warehouse. This is a building where the musk that comes out of the far building is turned into paper on big rollers, and that's then it goes into the warehouse. You can also see track here in the far end. Well, you can't see it. It's where all the chemical cars go. You do see another collection of chip cars. I just think they're very interesting. The railroad just kept coming up with some sort of answer. We're almost done. Here's the hole we come out of on the main line underneath the Christopher paper. When we come out to this area, that is both a yard and staging. Full of 10 tracks. You can see a couple of trains are made up there. One large train goes to the lumber mill you already saw, and the stock train will run the railroad all the way back to Swift. And the others, this is just interchange tracks. You also notice I have a runaround here. Even though I have diesels, so I don't need to turn them, I do need to give them place to run around, put the boosters on the opposite end, so when they make a run back east, the boosters are proper place. And here's a little rundown of all the tracks that are out in Vancouver. Okay.